Hello there girls and boys, today I'm gonna show you how to use the secret ingredients to make your THU rig player sound even better, so let's do it! Hello there girls and boys, as I said before, in this episode I'm gonna show you something that I should have told you before in a previous video. Let me roll it back to you. Treble, presence and volume. But at the top you got the different parameters that changes the way the amplifier or the rig as it's called in the... Yes, in that instance, I decided to skip over that particular part of the whole THU rig player thing, because I wanted you to understand how it worked. Now, it's time for you to get into the bigger part of the show. So now that you're a big girl and a big boy, it's time to learn some more. If this is the first time in the channel, I welcome you. In here I show you every single thing that we do to write, produce, mix, and of course perform our music live. Just because I think and I believe that making a living as a musician shouldn't be a dream. It's a possibility, and if I can do it, you can do it. So make sure to subscribe. With that being said, let's get into it now. The way that we're gonna do this is, I'm gonna show you first a previously recorded track on which every single guitar you're gonna hear was made and was produced using THU. But I'm gonna be showing you all of the different changes inside of the rig player, because well, believe it or not, all of the sounds are using basically the same settings, just changing some of the parameters inside of the secret part of the THU rig player concept. So here we go. So welcome back girls and boys to Logic Pro X. In front of us we got the project that I used to create this song. So now it's time to talk about THU. So the first thing that we're gonna discuss is gonna be this. This section, these white knobs, it's what this video is gonna be all about. If you wanna learn more about the rest of the software, you should go to one of the previous videos that we got somewhere around the screen. But continuing with the purpose of this project, it's we're gonna start talking about this definition knob. Okay, what it does is this. If you are familiar with vintage amplifiers, you may know that these amplifiers are renowned for having a little bit much more of a darker sound. They are not as precise or as clear sounding as some of the much modern counterparts, and that's a lovely sound. So what this knob does is exactly that. You can control the amount of low-end energy that is produced by in the input section of your guitar. So this is how it sounds like. Let me just confirm that we solo this section. Solo. Now we're gonna play it back. Now I'm gonna start to mess around with the definition knob so you can have an idea how it's gonna be affected the signal. Isn't it cool? It's quite dramatic, the changes that you can get out of this. And it's important because if you are dealing with a super high-end amplifier, what you want and what you need is a clearer sounding guitar sound. Why? Because if you have so much low-end going into the amplification algorithm, what you're gonna get, it's gonna get a super distorted track without definition. So, but on the other hand, if you want to get something warmer, a little bit more mellower sounding, this is a great way to get that sound. And remember, girls and boys, this is important. What we're dealing with is gonna be mainly reflected on our playing rather than the sound itself. Okay, so most of those changes might not be as noticeable as this one. So, with this being said, let's continue. Now, the next stage is gonna be the power sag. And what it does, it's adding a little bit of compression to the signal. but not in the way that a traditional compressor would. Because in here, we're changing the way that the tube saturation at the beginning of the circuit happens. And as a result, you're going to start to get some sort of quasi compression. Okay, so let me play it back to you so you can have an idea. This is happening because we're starting to add a little bit of we're affecting the way that the tubes at the beginning or the first stage of the amplification circuit are reacting to our playing. So the further we push it, the less dynamic range we're going to start to get. So, okay, let's get moving into the next section, which is the obviously named compressor. What it is doing is compressing the signal, but the clean signal going into the circuit. That way, we can control the amount of dynamic range that, once again, working in tandem with the power sag, is going to be reflected in the sound that we're getting, and especially in our playing. Here we go. I'm going to mess around with it. In my opinion, this is my favorite feature of the software. Why? I'm glad that you didn't ask. The reason is because this is where something like changing the volume on my electric guitar is gonna affect the sound of the compressor or of the whole rig. Why? Because thanks to this, we can get much more dynamic range, and we can make sure that if we hit harder, the sound of the whole amplification is not gonna be saturated because we're controlling the amount of energy, and we can have a much more steadier sounding playing. Now, the next one is gonna be clarity, and this is quite cool because if you remember, the definition and it's affecting the low end, but in here we're adding more presence, and we're adding some of the clear signal, the non-affected signal, through our circuit. So here we go. For this example, I'm going to use a different section of the track. I'm going to use this guy, which is the electric guitars, the backing electric guitars. They sound like this. Really cool, once again. And I'm gonna make sure that we use this guy, and this is the rig player that I used for that sound. I'm gonna solo it once again and make sure that we have a looping section. So here we go. Okay, now I'm gonna mess around with the clarity. You're gonna start to hear some changes happening inside of the sound. But once again, those changes are not gonna be dramatically reflected on the sound. Most of those changes are gonna be reflected on my playing. The thing is that I got the sound as a result of me messing around with the software while I was playing my guitar live. Here we go. But it's quite clear. It's quite cool because you're getting a much more clearer sound, and especially since you're dealing with a super distorted guitar track like this one, you add that sort of clarity that it's helping the signal to go through without being messed up by the low end that is being generated by the whole distortion of the amplifier. Now we move into the next section, which is the tube shape, and this is interesting because here we're dealing with a kind of this distortion is happening inside of the circuit. Let me explain, girls and boys. If you're familiar, or if you're not, the way that an amplifier works, or a tube amplifier works to be precise, is by having two different sections. I'm going to explain it in the simplest term possible because I don't want to spend much time dealing with this issue. A guitar amplifier has a preamp section and a power amp section, okay? The preamp is where the first impact happens. That's where your guitar is being fed into. That section is going to be amplifying that signal, your guitar signal, and then it's going to be sent into the power amp section, which is going to be amplifying not only that signal, but it's also powering the speaker cabinet that you have your amplifier plugged into. And as a result, you get certain amount of distortion from both of those sections. So this is what we deal with. We're changing with the tube shape the way that our distortion is happening. And we can go from a preamp section distortion to a power amp section distortion sound. The difference is that preamp tends to be a little bit more defined, much more crystalline sounding, and power amp tends to be way more powerful, much more aggressive, but it's a little bit fluffy on the lower end. So here we go. Now, the next section is going to be this tube bias. If you're familiar once again with tube amplifiers, this is where we tell the amplifier how much energy we want it to use to amplify our signal. And as a result, we're going to get a much more distorted track. Here is where we can change it. And as you can see, we already are working with a kind of overly biased amplification. So I'm going to mess around with it and you will hear the difference. Here we go. The interesting part is that we are creating more harmonic content. We're adding it into the signal. That way, we end up with a much more, harmonically speaking, richer sound, which in simple terms means that we got a much more interesting distorted track, if it makes any sense. But you hear it, so that's the important part. Now we're about to hit the last section of this video, and it's gonna be the direct mix. So let's talk about it. In here, we get this final knob, and for this example, we're gonna use the lead guitar. Here it is in all its glory. This is what I used to create the lead sound, and it's only just a little bit of preamplification in the form of a booster pedal using an overdrive. Then I put a little noise gate to control the amount of noise that was generated thanks to this little pedal over here. Then we go through our Mark II C+ recreation, which is another Mesa Boogie amplifier, which I love. And I added a little bit of delay, and that was it. So here is where the direct mix makes a huge difference. Remember, what we're going to be doing is adding more of the original sound, the original signal, without any form of distortion. The one that sounds like if I turn off the whole plugin. And you might be wondering, why would you like to get something like that? That sound sucks. Yes, it does. But the reason why you need it, it's because with it, you're going to add more definition to your playing, and also you're going to bring back some of the dynamism of your playing. Because as you might have understood up until this point, every single step so far has been adding more, little by little, more instances of compression to the signal, to your signal. And as a result, you end up with a really compressed guitar track, which in honestly, that's how a distortion algorithm works in reality. You're just compressing the signal as a result of using distortion. But you want to have some more of that dynamism in your playing. This is where you get it. So here we go. I'm going to play around with it. As you could hear in that last passage, when I was doing the lick, since I got rid of some of that compression that happens thanks to the distortion of the amplifier, some of those notes weren't as loud as they should. So that's why you have to be careful with this knob. But let's say that you're playing something completely different that requires a lot of your touch sensitivity. This is where you're gonna get that beautiful sound. As you just saw, girls and boys, it's not that complex, but actually this is what makes TSU so important and so powerful. And that's the reason why I love it so much. And as you can see here, just by messing around with some of the parameters, you can change completely the way that the whole software is interacting with your guitar and your playing. So that way you can come up with something that it's not only closer to what and a real life amplifier should sound like, but also you come closer to something that it's a reflection of your own sound. If you like this kind of content, the best way to support this channel is by listening to music on Apple Music or Spotify, and also subscribing to our social media channels such as Instagram and Facebook. Also, if you have any questions, leave a comment down below because I would like to answer it back. And of course, as every single time that I meet you girls and boys, I gotta remind you something. Never, ever, ever let anybody tell you what to dream about. And I'll see you.